Welcome to Purpose 360. I'm Carol Cohn, and today more than ever before, companies, brands, and their partners need to stand for something beyond the bottom line. I've created this program to provide insights and ideas to share with you so that you can apply them to your work the very next day. The goal here is to up-level your purpose and to benefit companies and society. So please join us. With me today is Wendy Salomon, and she is the Managing Director of Corporate Strategy and Reputation at the Harris Poll. The Harris Poll has been in existence since 1963 with deep capabilities in public polling and strategy and reputation. But today we're going to deeply concentrate on their research on COVID-19 with the public, with all generations. How do people feel today? What are they looking for companies to do? What are they looking to engage with each other? What will life look like? Hopefully when we return back to normal in some months versus perhaps longer than that. Welcome to Purpose 360. I'm Carol Cohn, and today we have a very special show about research. Candidly, I love research. I've been doing research in the field when we started with the first ever companies and social issues research, the Cohn-Roper Report in 1993, and I've done, over about 30 surveys since, and just love the data, love the insights, because it really informs our work. And then ever since the beginning of my career, I've always shared it. Throughout my career, I came across this amazing individual, Wendy Salomon. And Wendy has become a fast friend. She is the Managing Director of Corporate Strategy and Reputation at the Harris Poll. And she's been there in the various iterations of Harris for over 25 years. Welcome, Wendy, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And today we're going to talk about research and the power of research and different types of research, but we're really going to drill down heavily into COVID-19. Harris is doing ongoing public polling. They're parsing it out via various segments, and they're sharing it with everybody liberally because we're all in this together, and any additional insights we can gain are absolutely critical. So, Wendy, let's just start with the Harris Poll. Can you talk about its history, because it's quite rich?
Yeah, sure. So, the Harris Poll has been in a really privileged position for more than 50 years, where we've really had a very front row seat on not on culture, on business, on politics. And so I think it is really relevant in a time like that, that privilege becomes a responsibility, right? So when you talk about what Harris is doing is we are using our core skill set, which is polling and measurement, to help the public and to help businesses and to help the media, to be honest, is a large stakeholder of ours, just helping everyone understand sort of where things are now on the COVID-19. And you're right, Carol, this comes out of a really rich history. So, we sort of have straddled all sides of the aisle here in our history. We've had Lou Harris, who is legendary as a pollster for JFK. We also have within our DNA Richard Worthland, who was Ronald Reagan's pollster. Right now, we are one of the Stagwell companies, and Mark Penn is a leader of that. And so, we have this connection to the populace, both in terms of measurement, in terms of politics and business. And so I think this really is a time when many companies, right, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, are finding their best selves and all that. And I think Harris is very much among them. So as you mentioned, all of our COVID-19 polling and insights, and I mean, down to the crosstabs for people who like such things are available for everyone to see. So this is very much, when I talk to people about corporate character and about how companies behave in times of crisis, you know what the answer is? You behave in times of crisis pretty much as you behave in normal times, right? Like the best, if you find your best self, when things are seen as authentic, It's because it's kind of reflects how you are in your life, right? And so, and in your working. And so I think companies today, some of the ones that we'll like maybe talk about as rising to some of these challenges, we probably could look back at how they've been in recent history and see some signs of that character as well. So I'd like to think that Harris is in that list, right? In terms of, we've always been monitoring culture, and right now we're really at an all in this together where it's super important that everybody understands. And we're doing it from the public perception. We're doing work among small businesses and among different target groups that right now are there's just a real need to understand what's going on.
That for sure. And I would be remiss if I didn't state that I worked with Wendy on the Good Life research that was a platform for sustainable brands, both in the U.S. and globally. And she was most generous in being a wonderful partner with us. And then most recently, she partnered with us on our B2B purpose paradox. So let's get into your COVID research. First of all, what was the methodology? And then what were your major insights gleaned from it?
Sure. Yeah. So the COVID research we're doing is really a body of research. So it's building on each other. I think the heuristic value of the full set is probably still to be determined, right? Because we're still building it. So the methodology primarily is, an online survey of, either 1,000 or 2,000, depending on, we do a lot of flash polls and things like that, always with the Harris polls. Adhering to our media standards in terms of thought leadership. So, our representativeness rules and all of our mandates, which actually Harris is industry leading on sort of how to construct good research programs, both at the questions and at the sampling and the representativeness and the data quality checks at the back end. So online survey, 1,000, some of these questions are based on an at 2,000. But what we're doing is since the beginning of this, well, I guess you can argue when the beginning is, but certainly for the last 3 or so weeks, as sort of the intensive nature here in the U.S. has become very obvious, and we've realized the challenges that it presents to the business community, to the healthcare community, to all of us, each in our own homes right now. We really wanted to understand it, and so I think we're in our 4th wave is coming out of the field now, and so we've been measuring a number of questions on an ongoing basis and a number of questions, and we, I think the notion here is flex, right? Companies are flexing absolutely. All over. Mm-hmm. We are finding new ways to address situations that we never thought we would be. And so we're sort of approaching the research with that in mind. So what are the issues this week, right? So we weren't talking about buyouts a month ago, but more recently we've been saying, what does that look like? So I mean, I think the research, if I had to sum it up, I think that I've talked about this privileged position of monitoring culture and people, and it's great cocktail party fodder, just sort of knowing what Americans are doing. Right now, I really see the level of fear, the level of concern, the level of taking this seriously is wildly different, right, than it was 3 weeks ago. Okay. And so I'll tell you, research is, you can really hang your hat on it, right? If you ask it on day one, sans any major event, you can usually think that on day 3, it's not going to be wildly different. I have never in my career been in such a wildly changing landscape. So from a methodological standpoint, you'll measure a question, about behaviors, for example, like how likely would you go out to a bar, 3 weeks ago, and you had 20-some% or whatever it was say yes. And then literally by the time you got that data, you knew it felt tone deaf. Mm-hmm. By then it was up to 40 3 days later. Then you measure that and you're like, I knew it was higher. Mm-hmm. And then by the time you want to talk about that data, bars are closed, right? I mean, it is a wild sort of backdrop, but we are seeing very much the seriousness that's happening. In terms of, the number of people that say, oh, the level of fear is irrational, we're really blowing this thing out of the water. We see that actually going down, right? So there are fewer people think that the risks are overstated, and there is an increasing percentage of the public right now. We're up to 61%, and we're coming out of the field now. So my guess is that this is higher, saying that, it's a pandemic. This level of fear is absolutely sensible. And, I think we have just monitored that over time. And the fear is a really sort of equal opportunity sort of risk, right? So we say, what about the fear to you personally? We say, what about the fear to the people, the elderly, just the health of Americans, or the economic fear of the American economy? And you see all across where it's 70, 75, 90%, 80%. So in research, in a polarized world, um, it has gotten harder and harder for us to report about that full-throated response when 91% of the people agree. Like, think about it, right? There are not that many things, unfortunately, these days where you have such a universal agreement. And so, the fear for the economy, the fear for the most vulnerable among us has just escalated to that point, which, one could say is reasonable. And when we say, how long do you think this is going to last?
Right.
And I think when we deploy this research for the business community, it's always about, what, we are going to turn a corner together, right? We're holding hands in this and we are going to turn around the corner. So let's just think about where the public thinks that is, because we know that this is the canary that says, how soon after will they go to a restaurant, right? How soon after would they go to a gym? And so the public right now is saying they're assuming that this is like a 2.5 month thing. And again, this is the data that I'm talking about now is from late last week. So it may have changed over the weekend. But the long tail of this is really evident in our data. So what I mean by that is, when will you go to a gym, right? When would you go to the movies or like a large concert or sporting event? Some people are saying, a portion of people are saying, oh, it's going to take 2 months after the restrictions are lifted for me to want to do something like that.
2 months after restrictions. Okay.
Right. And that's not the majority, but when you've got 25% of the people saying, oh, I'm going to stay put for 2 months more, you think about, let's do the math and multiply that out on the economic impact. So there's not this universal, like, as soon as I can get outside, I'm going to go to a restaurant, go to a bar, go to the gym and go, to the baseball game.
I'm curious about what people are saying about going back to work.
I think right now that our focus has been more about employer policies. I think that, first of all, many people are working just in new ways. So going back to the office maybe is one of the is what you mean by that, right? Because what we are seeing is that the employer actions, right? So we're asking the public, what has your company done, right? And this is another seismic thing about how the past 2 weeks have really changed. Right now, at first, well, they're telling me not to travel. That was around 2 weeks ago. That was the story. How many employers are telling people not to travel? Last week, it was more like, or a week and a half ago, we're working from home. So this mandated work from home policy. And then now it's more sort of personal touching, no handshakes for those that have a more personal connection. But, it used to be that 35% of the public said, oh, my employer's done nothing. And right now that number is down to less than a quarter, right? So the public is playing, so companies are taking action, right? So we're seeing that they're telling them what to do. What's interesting is that we see less action on policies related to sick leave, policies related to, are they going to pay me for it? Is there more wellness stuff or more preventative care stuff? So we don't see that in the public's mind being played out quite as much, but we are seeing there's basically the public is seeing more of their employers doing something beyond just working remotely. And, we are the polling partner of Just Capital. And I think that's also someone, sort of contacted.
He's been on the show a number of times.
Yeah, right. Martin.
Yes.
But, so they're doing a great thing, which I would point your listeners to, where they are pretty much keeping track of actual corporate behaviors in terms of the policies and adjustments to sick leave. And so we do know that companies are doing these things. I think what's interesting, we're asking things around, do you sense a decrease in productivity, for example? Mm-hmm. And we have seen that go up among remote employees over the last 2 weeks.
That they're decreasing their productivity or increasing?
Yeah, they're feeling just a little less productive than they were 2 weeks ago. They're feeling considerably more isolated. Around 25% of them compared to like 10% are saying, I'm feeling pretty isolated. So these are those things that I really invite us to think about, to quote Governor Cuomo, right? This is a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're seeing week over week a doubling of feelings of isolation, what will that mean for a month from now?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I think I go to bed with images of the Zoom screen in my head with all the little squares and little faces in it, right? So
Right.
for all of these sort of the way technology is enabling these types of collaborations, technology has been a fabulous partner to date. Will it be enough in 2 weeks when we're seeing feelings of isolation double? I think the other sort of more modest things we're seeing about the work environment now as we measure the public is, there's these other challenges. There's these kids that are always around, right? And, I
Mm-hmm.
don't actually have a home office, some tell us. They're like, I sort of fit this in my kitchen or,
Mm-hmm.
And may or may not be private. It may or may not be quiet. It may or may not involve pets. So these types of things, I think I just get a sense looking at this data that it doesn't feel like an easy solution for the long term. So I really am eager to see how we, I think as we move away probably from employer actions and sort of how are we coping in these new environments? I think it's going to be something that's going to be fascinating.
And are corporates coming to you and adding questions to this research, or are you just doing it writ large?
Well, we're doing it writ large, but I mean, we do everything in context, right? So I think more so than other companies, Harris is, we bring that bigger context. Our ears are always open to the marketplace and what's going on, to our clients, to the people that we hope will be our clients, on what they wish they knew. So to say that this research hasn't been informed by them would be totally disingenuous. But this is just research we're running and fielding and sharing. Now, we have, when we think about how research is changing right now and what people that are coming to us need, they need what they've always needed. They need to look around the corner and know what's coming. If they're a restaurant, they're eventually going to reopen. They want to know what to put on the menu, right? I mean, we have to sort of honor that there are still the business as usual research questions, but what people are asking us now is far more for quick turn. So our flash poll solution. So the work that we do that helps clients say, what you did yesterday, did you see it? Did people see it? Did they understand it? Do you need to tell that story differently? What you're planning to do tomorrow, how will that be seen? Harris Poll is the leader in research for public release, so thought leadership research. So research that is designed to be easily recognized by the media as well constructed and valid. And so a lot of our clients use us to help tell their own story, right? What do they need what is a position that they would love for a policy influential, for example, to understand about American perceptions? Can they use research when they sit down with the people that matter to them to convince them to behave in certain ways?
As such we did with the B2B purpose paradox.
Exactly.
Well, we felt that the next evolution of purpose was more into the B2B world. And so I'm going to put you on the spot here. So
you said you were going to do that till the end. Okay,
it's okay. Well, let's do it now. We can always recut this. So we launched it February 11th. Interestingly, because if we had waited a couple more weeks, it would have been nobody would have heard about it. We got some good exposure to it. But now the world has changed dramatically. So I'm just curious, we'll combine this with. There's some B2Bs out there that are really responding well, or B2B, B2Cs, like Microsoft or 3M. So why don't we just turn to that first? Like, who do you feel in terms of companies are living up to their authentic values and really providing public service at this time?
There's a number of examples of those. I think 3M is an interesting one. Because so we have at Harris something called the reputation quotient. We've been measuring the reputation of America's most notable and prominent companies for the past, I think we're in our 22nd year, something like that, a really long time. 3M 20 years ago was in like the top 10 most trusted company.
Yeah.
They have just lost relevance. Now, they are a high reputation company, but they don't make our list anymore. They're just not in the consciousness of the American public. I ran some research last week where it's sort of the Main Street view where we talked open-ended We asked 1,000 Americans, what company comes to mind as responding to this crisis in a way that makes you feel more positively about them? So this is total Main Street. This is if I asked your cousin, if I asked your neighbor. And 3M made it to that list, to the top 10 on that list. So in other words, what they are doing is breaking through. They're a well-known company, heads nod all around the table. Oh, 3M, heard of them, good company. But they're not necessarily relevant for today. But what we're seeing is a real inflection point, I think, for them, because they very much are now. And they've also developed some interesting partnerships. I mean, they're partnering with Ford. Ford is partnering with GE Healthcare. So you also, I think times like this are not just individual companies, but I always like to watch, I'm like making a web gesture with my fingers, like sort of how they're connecting to each other,
Right. Coalitions,
right? Like
yeah.
all of a sudden, you see companies you would not expect to be joining hands and jumping in that pool together doing exactly that. And I think the auto sector has been a great example of, I talk about philanthropy. This is me using polling for good, right? What we're trying to do now with COVID. I mean, what is Ford doing right now? They're retooling, and their union workers are back, and they're using the assets. I mean, what Bill Ford, he goes, yeah, we opened up the parts drawer. And that cracked me up. I'm like, yeah, you got a big parts drawer, but and they're bringing this into the world. They are part of the solution. So, I think there's many examples of this. And for some companies, it is really driving relevance in a way. And 3M is the best example of that.
And I coined a phrase called smart generosity.
Ooh.
Thank you. That we believe that the 3Ms of the world or the Fords of the world, companies that I saw Jo-Ann Fabrics, which is, you don't talk a lot about Jo-Ann Fabrics, but they have sent out information to customers and NGOs. You can buy these kits. There's fabric. You can sew masks. You can sew gowns, things like that. And so, this smart generosity, goes back to the authenticity of a company's values and goes forward. I think that one of our clients, First Robotics, was founded by the, U.S. genius Dean Kamen. He's an inventor. He's a prolific inventor. And he has companies. People know him because he invented the Segway. Or the first robotics competition, where he felt that, that any child could turn pro because they were working on robots and learning about STEM. And he really, created the first robotics competition so that, that kids could grow up one day to be revered, just like an athlete. So he has all these companies with a vast supply chain in China. And he is knitting them together and then offering them up to the government. Again, smart generosity to help build ventilators, per se. So I'm just curious, who else is on the list that's come to the fore?
Well, I think, who's on the list actually are from the Main Street side of the house is a lot of retailers. Mm-hmm. Walmart and Amazon and Target. We see Dollar General, Walgreens, Publix, right? So when you see the image of the patriot, it is moving away. It is moving towards the medical community. I mean, I'm sure everybody's social media feeds are filled with beautiful images of care, of, the front line, the new front line. They are also grocery baggers, right? We are redefining what that looks like in this country. And you see that being played back in these companies. And what have they done for it? Sometimes they've opened up early for seniors, for the most vulnerable. Sometimes they've said, we're going to give you guys hazard pay, right? You guys are on the front lines. Sometimes they've said, we are going to do what's right for society. So when we think about community health, it takes selfless gestures. And so sometimes it involves offering sick leave to a very large workforce, because that makes them stay home when they're sick, right? Which is good for community health. So you see things like that. Now, what's interesting, we also ask a question that says, okay, but now name a company, and again, open end, anybody that comes to mind, that you think should be doing more to help address the crisis. And do you know who we get? The exact same ones, right? So you also see expectations. Walmart, Amazon, top of both lists. Amazon, Walmart, top of they should be doing more. So it's not as if you get a get out of jail free card, like, okay, great, you've played your role, thank you. Go rest now. You really see that Main Street is saying, these are the people that have to do more. Now, what I'll tell you is we ask a really interesting question, because I think our purpose work together, Carol, was really instructive as we looked at B2B companies and said, this is in your camp too. And we see that so many of them are on the threshold of perhaps not fully activating, but this is in their DNA as well. I think what's interesting is when we look at industries. So we ask the public, since the outbreak began, how has your view of each of the following industries changed due to the response to the coronavirus pandemic? And what we see is that who is gaining industry reputation. So when I say that, there's like a virtual bank somewhere, right? You got a good reputation. What does that mean? You could take a few more arrows, you could make a few missteps, but you overall have this equity bank. And so we're seeing that build in grocery exponentially, and we're seeing that build in healthcare, of course. So again, it's very confirming of the other work we're doing. Now, the third most common, and I'm putting industry in quotes, it's technically not an industry, but sector, is small businesses. This is the moment, I think, where we're seeing the public really leaning in, looking left and right and saying, there's a lot of those, and wow, that's really problematic for a lot of people. So I have been really interested in seeing how the public is, they're more open to bailouts for small businesses.
I think you take it for granted in your just normal, life. Oh, I'm going to the cleaner. I'm going to the grocer. I'm going to the diner. I'm going to the vet. Gosh, when my vet's closed, and it says go to an emergency room, I hope my animals aren't going to get sick right now.
And even, so just back to the industry thing for a minute, because I do think that there is, and it kind of ties to 3M, it ties to the purpose work we do, it ties to purpose in unexpected places, right? So when we say to the public, what industries should be providing solutions during this epidemic, you get the basics. You get pharma, you get healthcare, you get tech. So people are looking to tech. You get less than 20% of the people saying auto. You get less than 20% of the people saying, nonprofit should really be playing a role here. 24% say manufacturing, which means 75% don't think that they have a real role to play. So when I go back to, if I'm talking to business leaders in some of these sectors that the public does not think is part of the solution, to me, I don't know if it's crass to talk about opportunity, like sort of in the throes of this, but from a business perspective, it feels like there's a real possibility to let the public know about the good that these other sectors can do, because they're looking in obvious places, right? They're looking at technology because that's connecting us. They're looking at the front line. Pharma maybe is where we're going to get that some sort of vaccination or some sort of treatment, and the healthcare workers, of course, but they're not looking at auto, and auto's doing plenty, and they're not necessarily looking to, a lot airlines. They're not looking even necessarily to grocers for solutions. So I think that there is a chance for many industries to shine a light on the good that they're doing, because, we know from our work together that as people think about what the good life means, right? Sort of going back to that sustainable brands touchstone, like it's not just about product, it's about how, and it's about how it makes me feel. When we look at how business to business companies and the role that purpose plays for them, but the role that purpose plays overall. This was the year of the BRT and the big stakeholder capitalism, moving beyond just shareholder value, right? So I think that there is a very big appetite for the people to know what companies are doing right now. We particularly see that, from younger parts of the marketplace are just as interested in seeing it. And so I do think there's an opportunity for the companies working in some of these spaces that the public really isn't looking to for solutions, but yet they are delivering them beautifully daily.
I saw an interview with John Chambers, and it was about, he took Cisco through many, many crises. And he was saying that, unfortunately, he thinks that CSR programs are going to really suffer
Yeah.
And I'm curious about, we're seeing companies stand up, stand out, being selfless, smart generosity. But, as someone who's worked in the business for the field for 30 years, I'm worried that the absolute core day-to-day needs, like pay my employees, other things are going to fall by the wayside.
I do feel, I actually was just speaking with my team recently about this, that, boy, I haven't heard the term climate change in a while. I completely, I think it is a very reasonable thought to wonder if there has been a shifting of purpose initiatives. So are they going to move from, I think there's such a personal nature to what's going on right now, right? It has such a humanity, right? It's about workers. It's policies that keep their families safe. It's about protecting the most vulnerable. It's about everybody joining hands and finding a solution. Staying home is the most civic thing you can do. And so it does take some of those broader initiatives. It feels like they're going to have less resonance in the year ahead, unless they are connected. What I do think is here to stay is this notion of civic, right? And we've seen that in the past year, especially in the US, I think, where conversations have gone, the polarization, I think, right now has made it difficult to stay away from political and to keep it in the civic and human, right? There's been this line that companies are trying to find in the increasing, politicization of corporate America even. And so my sense is that as long as we keep tying back to this human touchstone, that's going to be important. But I think that fear is a little bit founded, that we may see a little bit less energy. It's a heavy lift, right? What we're doing now. And so how to ask us to go back to, I go back to all of these, we've done a lot of work around what issues matter. And not even just what issues matter to Americans, which we look at all the time, but what issues do Americans think that companies should engage in, which is a different question, right? And you see things around, you see a lot about healthcare, a lot about that safety net. And so I think that's going to become only more prominent. I think actually how companies are in relation to workers will be more prominent. I think it will be a little bit less likely that we see the same relative to how companies are in relation to the environment. We may see some little bit of lessening of intensity of commitment to some of those issues for the near term. But what I think is really interesting is that the number one thing on that list of all the issues we measure that companies need to address is data privacy. And when I think about, we've done a lot of work around, how Americans are behaving. How would a company help somebody stay socially distant? Do you put a chip in your watch that actually says, oh, maybe it's a COVID tracker where somebody in this, arena / deli, I don't know, and this is all, but don't you, in this moment of pandemic, things seem reasonable, right? And so I'm really curious to see where our relationship to data privacy goes as companies develop new products and new solutions, where this may be actually a core input to something that does protect community health, right? Or you personally, or your family. So that's been a really interesting one, I think, particularly as you think there are parts of this population that aren't, when we look at the older population, for example, a lot of our work around who's doing what in terms of compliance around COVID, there's a lot of cavalier people in their 60s and 70s we're finding who are like, oh, no, I'm totally compliant, but, I go to the store every morning. You got to get out, right? Whereas the rule would say, well, actually, you shouldn't do that quite that often, or you should minimize that. They're less likely to have food delivered. They'll go pick it up.
Yeah, let me ask you this about changing behavior. Because, we are now told, wash your hands, 20 seconds at least, et cetera. And, stay at home, social distancing. What's your vision of how much will our behaviors change when we lessen the curve and we start going back to work?
Oh, I think they're going to change wildly.
And what do you think the new behaviors are going to be?
I think I have been astounded. So what's it been? 3 weeks? I don't know.
Yep.
And I've been astounded at how well I can connect with clients, understand their needs and what we need to do with them without hopping on a single airplane. Right. And what would Greta say about that? She'd love it. Right. So back to,
Right. A lot less travel. Right.
I think there's going to be a fair amount less of that. I think that my husband is a college professor and he just came out of teaching an online class. He's like, that was great. Like people who don't always speak were speaking up. And so you can see, I'm not talking about a replacement, but there is a whole generation of teachers at the elementary, high, and higher ed level that are learning a whole new bag of tricks. It's hard and it's painful, and sometimes the students are teaching them. But my guess is that the way education is delivered will be forever altered because we've upskilled in this mass civic effort. We have upskilled that entire profession over the course of 3 weeks. So, I really feel like those are some of the most obvious ones.
Let me ask you about, because you mentioned earlier civic engagement. And, I'm just following it massively. And also, I'd just like to say to our listeners that we have pivoted this podcast. We are also having a sister podcast called Humanity at Its Best. And we're looking for people stories. And we want to interview people, not a 40-minute interview like Wendy, but a 3 or 4 minute interview. We'll call you on your phone. Really simple. Tell us what good actions you took. And it's P360podcast@gmail.com, P360podcast@gmail.com. Just give us a few sentences about what you did. We'll call you up. We'll get you on the show. I want voices of people. So let's just talk about civic engagement going forward. What do you think is going to happen?
I saw something interesting, and I really want to give credit to the media channel, and I can't remember which it was, but how we went from the year of mass protests to the year of complete isolation. Right? And how, imagine last spring and the movements and the marches and the sort of that righteousness, right? So what do we do with that now that we're all in our own rooms? So I think that's all going to come back. I think here in the US anyway, so that's a global observation, but I think in the US we see little bits of civicness already. We are already thinking outside ourselves more than we used to. So what is one outcome of isolation? We're talking to our neighbors. Our data shows that large percentages of us have reached out to elderly who may be isolated. And they, normally they would not have done that, right? They've gone out of their way to think of the other. And when we think, back to the corporate purpose, it's about the other, right? And so we're seeing that at the level of individuals who are employees, individuals who are voters, individuals who are your neighbors, and we're seeing that at the corporate level. And I imagine that is going to, it's a muscle that we're still flexing, I guess is my point, right? And we're doing it in new and different ways, just like everything. But we are still flexing that muscle. I think the number of people, we've had 44% say they checked in with someone that they hadn't reached out to in a while. This is a massive virtual town that we're creating. How are communities going to change? How are households going to change when play dates are virtual? I think there's a lot of things we don't know, but we have seen a number of things among the public that is making us think that the civic connectedness that's at the core of getting out the vote and all those other civic activities that are oftentimes more front and center, it's still in our DNA, and we're seeing it manifesting in different ways.
So it's kind of a sleeping DNA, or
I love it.
A positive part of us that needs to be reinvigorated, and it is.
Well, and I think part of what, as we think about brands, I want to look around the corner, and again, not opportunistically, but we will get to the other side of this. What are the brands that are helping people find them best selves? What are companies that can say to Gen Z, who you still got 30% of them saying, yeah, I'd go to a friend's house for a visit in days of social distancing. So I want to, chain my Gen Z children down to the chair. But, so how can a brand, who's the Rosie the Riveter for Gen Z?
Yeah.
Right? Who's going to own that?
They won't even know. They won't know who Rosie the Riveter is.
but you did. That's the beauty. So, so like, who's going to make that translation, right? And so, what are the opportunities for? And by the way, it's not just Gen Z. Generationally, you've got older Americans who are being a little cavalier. I told you they're shopping a bit more than maybe they're not using some of the delivery apps and things like that. And what is the company or the solution for that that can help each of these different generations find their best selves and make those decisions easy for them to make in the interest of community health? Yeah, exactly.
And in our last remaining minutes, because it's been a fascinating conversation, what about millennials and more Gen Z? So the older Gen Zs, because I know you can't go younger in your polling, but what are the older Gen Zs? What are you hearing from them?
They are wishing that the older generation, they're the steady hand, it feels like, in some of our work, right? So they're actually a little bit more compliant about things than their older generation. And so you can just imagine what as you're zooming in your in-laws, what you're telling them to do versus what you're doing yourself. So I think that they are, everybody is in an unprecedented situation. Every generation, I think, will be changed for it. I think the millennials have the tools. We are seeing the technology and the role that it has, right? I mean, it's unbelievably. And by the way, it's really working well. I mean, imagine every day my household wakes up, what if the internet went out, right? But
God,
but things are doing well. So I think it's about some of those native tools, right? So those older Gen Zs are absolutely the one that have the skills to communicate this way from the beginning. So I think what we're seeing is that it's a little bit easier for them to tolerate as they build virtual communities and they replace those in-person things. In the case of cabin fever, they're finding better ways to avoid it.
I would love you to give like 3 tips or hints to companies and brands who want to appropriately act during these times?
I think the notion of taking who you are and making it louder and making it relevant. So if you can make something that can fill a void, you should. If you can sort of retool that strategy to engage in a new way, it really feels like that's the time to do it. Think about different partnerships. It is really deeply rewarding for me to see the bridges being built across our competency sets, from manufacturing, maybe to the nonprofit, maybe to education, maybe you make things, I market things, whatever the case may be, right? And so think of different partnerships that you could take today that could really amplify your efforts for doing good. You need to look at your workers. When we look at, as I mentioned, we're the polling partner for Just Capital. And when you look at the yardstick that the public uses, and I think this is only going to be amplified exponentially to evaluate a company's character. At the end of the day, wake me up in the middle of the night and ask me what I think about a company. It's largely going to be based on how you treat your workers. So if there's one bit of advice I could give right now, and every bit of our polling supports it, is look at those worker policies. Look at not just the letter, but the spirit of them. Make sure they are encouraging the behaviors that you would want from your own family. I think, and then make sure they're well understood. I think that really it's about the workers. So I think those would be my closing words of wisdom.
And in terms of our listeners are going to want to get more information from Harris, where should they go? On your website? What should they look for?
Sure. Yeah, at theharrispoll.com, we have a microsite set up for all the COVID-19 stuff. Also reach out to me and my contact information, I'm sure, will be with the podcast. I mean, we're a pretty nimble company, not that big. And so, call Wendy, just call me. I would love to talk more about it. And we'll make sure that all that contact
Okay, so now I'll embarrass you. I would like to say that Wendy is one of, she's at Smart Generosity. She is a wonderful partner. She's very hands-on. Her intellect is smart as a whip. Because when we get this data back, first of all, they help us form the questionnaire and the questions, and we have vigorous debate. And then when it comes back with these massive, oh my God, tables and such, she can really cut through and help us, see and formulate the insights. And so anybody listening for a great research partner, she is the best.
Oh, thank you, Carol. That's very sweet. And supported by a fabulous team, I would add, too.
Oh, a great team. Yeah. So thank you for spending this time. I know that you're really, really busy. We all will get through this, but having smart generosity and working collaboratively will help us hopefully get out of this sooner than later and stronger than ever before, learning all sorts of new ways to go to market in an authentic and caring and empathetic way.